each one of them an SNL star. The truly great Saturday Night Live. Every week we do a deep dive. Let's find out who are the greatest hosts, the ones that the fans love the most.
Yes, that is right. Welcome on in, everybody, to the Saturday Night Network for our summer series, the only place you want to be this summer talking about Saturday Night Live, and that is here on the Saturday Night Network, where we will be breaking down SNL's greatest hosts as voted by you. My name is John from the SNN. So happy to be here with you each and every Monday night live to talk through this incredible list that you have put together for us. And it's going to be so much fun doing this as a presentation of latenighter.com and with our co-host that we have on the show tonight. So let's bring in the man who's going to be here every Monday as well. And that is the great Bill Kenny. Bill, what is up?
John, how we doing? Well, I need that song on my Spotify playlist. Like that song, every week it gets better. It's only been 2 weeks, but it's better already. I am great. So excited to talk about the four people we're going to get into. Some controversy, some fun. Going to be very, very interesting to get into.
I think we have some amazing people to talk about tonight. Perfect. Like, this is the perfect podcast to talk through these people because there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had here. And I'm very happy to have somebody on who I know has some strong opinions about Saturday Night Live. And that is the amazing Kirsten Royala. Kirsten, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. That song, by the way, gave me big sitcom vibes. Like, I felt like we should all like turn around with like we all needed to do some of those. I was doing it. No one could see, but I was feeling like Saved by the Bell intros happening.
That's my era. So that's what
that's maybe what inspired that song. I'm thrilled to be here, but my summer's going great. It's fantastic. It's very hot in Toronto. Not a complaint. Well, a little bit of a complaint, but it's summer. So we're happy. It's nice and light out still at 8 p.m. So I have no complaints. And I'm so excited to be here because I love the dialogue and how much knowledge you both have and being able to sit with you and dig into this.
Yeah, this is super fun. So thrilled to have you on, Kirsten. We're also expecting a heat wave up here over the next few days in Montreal. So, let's bring the heat tonight. Let's start it off with some fiery conversation. And we'll start off by talking about who we revealed last week on the podcast. So if you're just tuning in and you haven't checked out last week's show, maybe pause here, go back because we're going to spoil those people in just a moment. So we revealed 4 names on the list, and that is 50 through, I'm going to say 47. Yeah, 47 last week. So I'll bring that up on screen in 3, 2, 1. And here we go. Cast rankings so far. So just 4 names on the ballot. We're going to get through all 50 for over the next 14 weeks. So 50 was 6-time host Danny DeVito. 49 was 3-time host John Lithgow. 3 then was 3-time host Anne Hathaway at 48 and 3-time host Jack Black at 47. So, Kirsten, how do you feel about the first 4 names we revealed so far?
I am surprised they're at the end. They are all pretty amazing SNL hosts. So that has to tell me that the 46 on down must be even better, but because I know who we're talking about tonight, I'm going to have a hot take on the order between that 4 and this 4 for tonight. I'm a little surprised, and I think there should be a bit of swapperoo happening.
Okay, that's great to know because we will definitely put up our rankings at the end of the show so we can talk through how you feel like Bill and I place these people and maybe where you would on your list as well. Bill, just do a quick summary for the listeners how you feel about the first 4 we talked about last week.
Well, as we were saying last week, I think Danny DeVito is very low based on being a host for 6 times, but he was definitely penalized for not being on the show for so long. And you can say the same for all 4 of these people in different regards. Lithgow's kind of disappeared completely as far as SNL, and Black and Hathaway have not hosted since the late aughts, early 2010s. So it's been a long time. I'm glad to see these 4 names on because it shows you that people know the history of the show. So it would have been very easy to just look at the last 10 years, pick 50 names and call it a day. I think people put a lot of thought into this as we have as well. So very excited to see where we're going. I'm very interested to hear Kirsten's hot take. So can't wait to get into that too.
Yeah, that will be a lot of fun. So before we start the reveals tonight, Kirsten, I would love to know from you, when you think about what defines a great Saturday Night Live host, what are your criteria that you usually use to decide?
I've given this a lot of thought. One of the things you said last week, John, was, and I've often said this myself, as have many of us on the show, that we think about who would have been a natural cast member. And I'm veering a tiny bit away from that, only in that I'm starting to think of this more as a recipe. And so in that mix, I'm putting enthusiasm, I'm putting preparedness, how much we feel like they were ready to go. And that comes down to even reading the cards or not. Committing to the bit. One of the things I love about some of my favorite hosts is how much they just dig in, which pertains to the next part, which I'd say is like a lack of humility. I think there are some folks that come on and they definitely want to look pretty and they want to look cute or they want to look the part, and it doesn't allow them to go into that commit piece where they're really just letting their hair down and having a lot of fun. And so when you add all these things up and then factor in how they get along with the cast, how they, interact with the kind of ensemble, it's a real recipe, and it's going to be different every time. And so, sometimes just one ingredient can just throw it off a little bit, but we all know when they get it right. And so for me, it's getting really hard to nail down, and I'm still kind of developing this, but I think it's more about the perfect recipe and what they're adding to the mix.
It's so funny that you say that, because I do find sometimes when I'm doing the hot take show after like a first time hosts the show, I have such a better gauge of whether the host elevated that show that night or made it worse. But it's harder for me with the multiple time hosts because I get used to the brand. So I think what you're saying really definitely applies to the one time host. But when we start to see a resume build, for me, it becomes a little bit less about those, smaller things that in my list, which is like, enthusiasm and stuff like that. And then I start looking at like, what are you truly bringing to the totality of the Saturday Night Live experience? And I think, that may be more applicable to some of these people who have bigger resumes.
Yes. You know what? Yes, that's right. Because let me continue then to say, yeah, if you have a character that gets, like, if you break through and you're one time and you've got a character that you bring back, that's huge. That is huge. And so that's got to be part of the mix too. Yeah. As if you're recognized as having a memorable character or impression, and they want to see it again. We want to see it again. That's really big.
Absolutely. Bill, anything you want to jump in on here before we start our reveals tonight?
No, I love all her takes. I think it is very important. And you bring up a very good point as well. When they do come back, and we've talked about this as well, it's hard because part of, especially people who watch as much as we do, to see a Mulaney come back, the hype is so big, or a former cast member, even if it's their second time or third time. You're so amped all week or for the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to it. There's going to be a letdown, especially if their first time in the show, hosting the show, was a really big deal and went really well. So we're going to talk about one of those people tonight. No spoilers, but I think to have a cast member in this is very big, because if you're able to continually do it, you're going on your resume as a cast member, coming back as a host. So you've got double duty, double thoughts in your head as far as how well you're going to do. So it's very, very interesting to see how people do on a third and fourth time.
Absolutely, it is. And that is a great segue to number 46 on the list as we begin our reveals tonight. Here comes another 4-time host, this time talking about a former cast member, our first former cast member on the list, and that is Dana Carvey here at number 46. We did get to talk about Dana in our cast rankings back in that countdown. All those episodes are available now as well if you want to go check that out. Number 9 on the cast rankings, I had Dana higher on my list. I think I had him at 5 on my personal list. To me, he is an all-time great, amazing cast member. But being a great cast member member, does that make you a great host? That is something we will absolutely be talking about as we go through all of his resume. So let me tell you about his 4 times hosting Saturday Night Live, starting with season 20, about a year and a half after he left the Saturday Night Live cast back in 1994. He hosted for the first time, and a lot of really interesting moments, brings back some favorites. We'll let Bill and Kirsten talk about some of those moments that they got to see, but some huge characters, as you would expect, coming back as soon as Dana is going to be there, because he is a force. It's like Prodigal Son is returning in this, what's about to be a pretty wretched season of Saturday Night Live. He's going to bring up the big guns in season 20. Season 22 comes back a couple seasons later, a totally different show in a new era in 1996 with musical guest Dr. Dre. That's a really fun show, and the first of sort of this distinguished alumni series that we're going to get in season 22 with all these former cast members coming back that'll define the season a little bit. Then we flash forward to the year 2000 and season 26, where we're going through the 2000 election. We get to see George Bush with George W. Bush, a really like passing of the torch moment between 2 different generations, with musical guest The Wallflowers there, and also Dana coming back after a botched heart surgery. So I guess we could talk about that a little bit, about where he was in his career. And then another flash forward to really a whole different era in 2011, where we get the great Dana Carvey coming back in season 36 with musical guest Linkin Park, and we get to see him in a whole different era of his life. So Bill, I know obviously for you have so many thoughts about Dana as a cast member, because he is one of your favorites by far. So let's talk about him specifically as a host and how you think he did, number 46 on the list.
Yes, he is definitely one of my favorites of all time. Definitely my first favorite on SNL when I started watching. All of his impressions hit so much for me. As far as his hosting goes, it's so interesting, as you said, coming back in season 20, very Kate McKinnon-esque to be back that quickly after he had left the show mid-season 18. And if you will just watch this episode, you wouldn't know it was season 20, because it's actually good. We haven't seen all the problems that are going to start to build as season 20 goes on. I think this is the 3rd or 4th episode of the season. So they're still finding their way, and they haven't gone to the wretched side quite yet. And you get a lot of fun stuff here, as you said. I think he sets the template, even though cast members had come back to host before. I think he sets the template for what a good host / cast member is. He has a great mix each episode of former impressions that he did, former characters that he did, and bringing new stuff to the table. So I think this was like when we see Will Ferrell and Kristen Wiig in modern times come back, this is what we're looking for as far as a cast member coming back to host. So yeah, I love all 4 of these episodes. I think this is the perfect example of he still brought it every time. 18 years, 19 years from first to fourth. So it's a lot of good stuff in each episode, and I can't wait to get into all the different sketches.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really feels to me, Kirsten, whenever Dana comes back in the building, it's like the prodigal son returns home. Like, he's truly celebrated. You get to see how powerful of a force he is. And I think it's actually very different than Will Ferrell and Kristen Wiig, who have both had huge careers outside of the show. Dana's career, besides Wayne's World, never necessarily took off in the same way that you would have expected based on how great of a cast member he was. So I find, for me, whenever I see Dana return to Saturday Night Live, it's like everything fits perfectly. This is where he was meant to be, and you see him thrive in this environment. And that is why he is such a great host. And for me, too low on this list. But I'd love to know your overall thoughts on Dana Carvey here at 46.
He was not someone that I alluded to was in the wrong place. I agree that he could be higher. He's someone that I think represents a time when a lot of people were watching the show who are of the age that are now very aware of like social media and the careers after and building your brand. And he didn't take that route. That came after him. I mean, I think he's got a podcast now and stuff, but he's and because of Wayne's World, people know him. But I agree, like, he didn't end up on a sitcom. We never saw him do any real serious work. He retreated a lot from the limelight. So he didn't really follow that playbook that so many others have. But he was so darn consistent on the show. It's almost like buying a lottery ticket you know is going to win, because he would show up and you know you're getting great impressions. It's good and bad that people know what to expect from you. It's good in that I'm excited and I know it's going to be good and it will deliver. It's bad because I'm not necessarily surprised. And there's that level of kind of what could happen that you don't get when you're watching someone new do it for the first time. But I'll also take consistency and legacy over that at times. He had so many characters and impressions that he actually had such a good kind of toolkit to pull from. So even though he was going to do an impression, we didn't know which one it was. Like I think about Regis, I might see Regis, I might not. I might see Johnny Carson. I might see Bush. There were so many that even if I on a short episode, it would feel short. You only saw 3 of those. He could come back 10 times and still not have exhausted all of the characters and impressions that he does. So that puts him right in the middle of that, where you know what to expect, but you're still going to be surprised.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, it is a shame that we haven't seen him on the show really since that time that he last hosted, because again, he is absolutely somebody that I think needs to host in season 50 to get to that 5-timers club. Like he's number 1 on my board, needs to get there. He's way, way too great at Saturday Night Live to not have that on his resume. And especially given that Jan Hooks and Phil Hartman are no longer around, he represents an era for me that needs to be more widely celebrated among modern day fans. So I just think, for all of those reasons, had we done this in a year, perhaps he is higher up on the board. And we talked about his, time outside the show. I think it was really fascinating for me, Bill, that, if you go back to season 22, and we're going to start to get into some of his moments, but season 22, episode 4, when he comes and he hosts, it's a few months after they tried to do the Dana Carvey show. And that is like one of the great, failures in, trying some primetime sketch comedy that didn't work out. And all these amazing people that we've known for a couple decades now all came out of, writing on the Dana Carvey show. And it's like almost like, hey, this could have been something. And it just didn't work. And he comes back and he hosts in season 22, actually does a sketch or 2 from the Dana Carvey show. And you see why he's so good at it. So for me, it's like, I know that there's an alternate universe somewhere where Dana is really successful outside of SNL more than, and it's not to take away from his podcast and some of the other things he's done, but just truly feel that there could have been more there, that we're looking at him much higher on this list. But Bill, let's start to get into some of the moments that you want to talk about from Dana Carvey's career as a host on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, well, and first you make a great point, because I think if Netflix had been around in 1996, you would have seen a Tim Robinson-like trajectory with Dana. His show was really, really funny, but it was raunchy for 8 p.m. on ABC, and it didn't work. There was a great documentary on Hulu. I don't think it's on there anymore, that explained everything. But yeah, there was so much with Smigel, Louis C.K., Colbert, Steve Carell, all of them being part of that show. You can't think a show like that would fail, and yet it did. But yeah, so let's get into some of it. As you mentioned, there are a few things from that season 22. The Brokaw pre-tapes was the dominant one from that, where Tom Brokaw is going on vacation, so he has to record all these different versions of Gerald Ford dying. And it just gets sillier and more ridiculous as it goes along. He brings back church quite a bit with modern characters sitting next to him. OJ in 96, and then the Kardashians in 2011. We get the OJ trial, which was brand new in season 20, with him playing Johnny Carson, and Michael McKean in one of his better roles playing Bob Shapiro as Ed McMahon, basically. And he's questioning Kato Kalin and doing his great impression. And he brought that back quite a few times as well. Wayne's World opening with Mike Myers in 2011 as well. And also Lovitz came back for that one as well. One of the better monologues, where he talks about 86 to 93 was the best. And indeed it was. So that's just a few. That's a tip of the iceberg for Dana Carvey.
Yeah, Kirsten, what about you? Going through some of the episodes that you saw from Dana as a host, were there any moments that you're like, oh, maybe some people who haven't seen these should definitely go back and check out?
Well, one thing we need to acknowledge is that George Bush introduced the show and he introduced him. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a really big deal. Like, yes, we ended up having, Hillary Clinton on, and we've had other kind of, political, I'm going to say legends, political known people. But that was a big one because he was the first face that we saw when the show started was George Bush, the real George Bush. That was a big deal. I have such love for Pepper Boy. It's just so silly and funny and really raunchy, but also Adam Sandler kind of downplay, like he wasn't being a goof, like he was still being silly and in character, but he wasn't being Adam Sandler, which made it funnier. But that one that's a real highlight for me. Is Pepper Boy. And New Roommates is kind of silly too. That's where him and Kevin Bacon are, discussing or negotiating the terms of this kind of roommate situation they're going to embark on, and they just are ridiculous and silly. And you've got to check out Kevin Bacon's hair on that one too.
Well, going back to Pepper Boy for a second, which is a really interesting sketch that I think a lot of people know for like Chris Farley taking it in a weird place, but it is a really solid sketch that I think a lot of people may have assumed was from his time as a cast member. But he like fit in really well. I do feel like if you watch that episode, you would not know it's from season 20, just because of how energized everybody is when Dana walks into the building. And I think it's so fascinating just to see every time he comes back. I really feel like he injects life into the show. One of those, you talked about, his relationship with George Bush. Obviously, he did this amazing impression of George Bush. Everybody felt like George Bush, the impression that you saw was how George Bush actually was. So it was really fun to see in that pre-tape, the sort of like pre-recorded thing that they were doing in season 20, where you get I guess he was just now the former president, George Bush, was, doing sort of an impression of himself with Dana and sort of going back and forth and saying, I don't actually do the things that you think that I'm doing. And I think that was really fun. It was a little bit of an ode to what they did with when Ron Nessen hosted back in season 1, and you had Gerald Ford there while Chevy was still on the show. It was like really the first time that they involved some sort of presidential figure in the show again. So these moments are all fantastic. And I think the other George Bush moment that I do want to point out, and we have that on the screen here, is the hunting sketch from season 26, which is sort of like an Of Mice and Men, where, George Bush is tired of his son being a doofus, and obviously Will Ferrell is going to play him very bro-y. So he gets him to keep walking and he's going to shoot him. So that to me is a great sketch as well. So all of these moments are so great, as you would expect. Here's why I think Dana Carvey is such a great host. And I think that the criteria I used last week isn't necessarily fair to apply to all former cast members, because I do ask the question, could you be a cast member? And the answer is obviously yes. So I think we have to talk about the other things that I said, which is, do you have a defining characteristic that you bring to the show? And I do feel like Dana has that, because he's so versatile that you expect that when he's going to be hosting the show. So that is for sure. He's one of the most versatile hosts we've ever seen, naturally. Can you work with multiple cast? And I think this is interesting here, because he works in so many different eras. We get to see him with different cast members. Like, yes, there are some moments here, including Wayne's World, where he brings back Mike Myers in 2011, but he's still like in sketches with Bill Hader. He's with different cast members. Like, Dana could truly work with anybody. So for me, that is the quality of a great host. It isn't like, let's say, like a Chevy, where I don't feel like he like lost it, like Dana still has it every time he's at the show. How many times has he hosted the show? From an analytics perspective, 4 times is a good amount. There's not that many 4-time hosts in the history of the show. And then legacy is a big question. To me, I think he has a huge legacy as a super fan of the show. Does the general public feel like he has a very large legacy? Bill, I'm going to ask you, how do you feel like, man on the street feels about Dana Carvey? I certainly think it must be higher now due to Fly on the Wall, but beyond that, is Dana Carvey's legacy as an SNL host very high?
I think so. I think he is one of the people who has evergreen characters. Ching Change aside, we'll leave him out. But I mean, Hans and Franz, Church Lady, it could be any era. It could be any time. Obviously, his impressions are of a time, but I think he's well known enough, even outside the podcast, that if you go on YouTube, it's going to be, the original cast. Some of the original cast, it's going to be Eddie Murphy. It's going to be Dana Carvey. Are going to be some of those 1900s cast members that are going to pop up the most, because it's relatable. I mean, you could watch Church Chat and get what's going on, even if you don't know who Tammy Faye Baker is. It's still very funny. So I think he still holds up, and the fact that he hasn't hosted in 13 years, but at least it's not 25 years like some of the other people we were talking about last week. So yeah, his legacy is solid for me.
Yeah, I will mention that he did come back as the church lady a couple times in the early 40s. So we did see him in the Brie Larson and the Benedict Cumberbatch episode. I think he did a church chat for one of those. And then the other one, he appeared on Weekend Update. So it wasn't too long ago that we got to see him. A couple moments that I think are important are, him being a special guest the week that Chris Rock hosts the show, which is actually the week after he hosts in season 22. So he sort of does like back-to-back episodes there. He also has some fun cameos on like Nicole Kidman, John Lovitz's episode in season 23, Christopher Walken's episode in 2000. So he does appear throughout the history of the show, and I think Dana's legacy is strong. I just want him to get that last hosting gig to really cement everything. So, Kirsten, let me get your final thoughts on Dana Carvey as a host, and through all your research, anything that you would like to tell the listeners about him.
Well, I did forget, but just remembered another sketch that I love, which was Perot on Halloween, and how he tosses some children. He physically throws them. I think there's a lot of halo. What's that?
Sorry, I was doing a Perot.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. I think that there's some halo effect with him too. Like, when I think of Dana Carvey, I associate him with Sandler and Hartman and all these great people. So, there's good vibes all around. So I remember him fondly from that time. I think Wayne's World has cemented that character for so many people. So there's always going to be this kind of Wayne's World vibe. What's unique about him, though, is it's tough to separate his cast sketches from his hosting sketches. So it all just becomes a bit of awesomeness. So I had to keep reminding myself as I was revisiting, okay, right, I have to look at his hosting stuff, but not his casting stuff, but it was all good. And I only think of him as this kind of person who did all these wonderful things. So it's hard to separate, but he was a great host. And so I do think he is too far down this list. That's my final thought on that one. Too far down the list.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly part of the fabric of the show throughout its history. So I think that I would love to see him higher here. Bill, for you, final thoughts on Dana Carvey?
Yes, way too low for me. I think Kirsten mentions the Perot Halloween. I love the Perot cold open with Will Ferrell. Even though Will's Larry King is not as good as Norm's, I think the way they play off of each other, which we saw 4 years later when he's doing Bush versus Bush, he plays such an undertone Larry King to the manic Perot, who's running for president a second time at this point. So that's why, he comes back 3 times in October. A lot of that is because of elections. So I think there's a lot of fun play there. And I think that the other one we haven't mentioned, talking about being able to work with a lot of different casts, the sports bar in the season 36 episode with Bill Hader and Fred Armisen, where they're this 80s style band who are playing in their brother-in-law's band on Super Bowl Sunday. And the guys just want to watch the game, and they're singing these ridiculous 80s romance songs. Great play with everybody that he's involved with. He should be in the 20s at least for me, but glad he's on the list.
I agree. I also would like to point out the sketch. I think it was Larry King getting married at his wedding, where you do get to see Norm as Larry King with Dana as Ross Perot. That was in the John Lovitz episode in season 23. So you do get to see them together, but it wasn't in the episodes that he hosted. That's why that's a little bit of a footnote there. But saying all that, we do ask the question every single time we reveal somebody, will we see them in season 50 and in what capacity? I think across the board, we can all agree that we want to see Dana as a host in season 50. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, even if you just look at the 4-timers that are left, that are not problematic and that are alive, he is got to be the number one with a bullet as far as getting his 5-timers jacket in season 50.
Roll out the red carpet.
Yeah.
All right, so that is Dana Carvey here at 46. Let's get to number 45 on the list. Speaking of 4-time hosts, let's talk about another one here at 45 on the list. This is going to be a very fascinating conversation as we talk about somebody who I don't think you could tell the story of Saturday Night Live without talking about this person here at number 45, the second host in SNL history, and that is Paul Simon here at 45 on the list. Host season 1, episode 2, 1975 with musical guest Randy Newman and Phoebe Snow. Returns one season later in season 2, episode 8 with George Harrison in a Thanksgiving episode that's very memorable for a lot of people. Musical guest a lot of times in between, including that season 5 episode, which we could talk about how people want to, whether they believe he was the host or not. But SNL doesn't count it, even though he's been in some 5-timer sketches. Season 11, he does host with Catherine Oxenberg, so he's sort of a co-host in that role there. But I think, the big name of Paul Simon, happy to have him there. And then season 13, he hosts the Christmas episode with Linda Ronstadt. And, Paul Simon, beyond just being a host of the show, has been a musical guest in the show like 9 times, cameoed 4 other times. Like he is very much a part of the entire series. We last saw him as a musical guest when Seth Meyers hosted the show a few years ago. So from the beginning of its run all the way through, clearly somebody who is very much a part of SNL history. And here he is at number 45 on the list as a host. So very interesting to talk about Paul Simon as a host. Kirsten, let me start with you this time on your overall thoughts on Paul Simon.
I like his music. I don't think he should be on this list.
Okay, tell me why.
I think he has it sounds like a wonderful friendship with Lauren. And I can, apparently, like, didn't Keenan say there was they had like a shared door between their apartments or something? Best BFFs for sure. And I think they cooked up some fun stuff. And, while I love his music and he brought a certain amount of star power for the time to the show, and it did fit with this more variety show style format they were using. I almost feel like they sometimes did that just so that they could just show Paul Simon singing. I don't get it. I think there's one sketch that I love, which is basketball, but that's not worth having him on this list for. He's not a host. Like, this is an anomaly, and it's not the exception I want to see.
I sort of agree with you. I really struggled with trying to figure out how to verbalize this because it is tough. I do think that out of all the criteria I consider for great hosts, I don't think he checks off any of them except for legacy. Like, it's almost like just the perception of him as a host of the show is stronger than he actually is. Probably to the exception of the season 2 episode, I would say, because I think season 1 is a different show. I still don't think they figured it out yet. Season 2, he does come in, and I think it is a musical episode, but he does a really good job, including that very famous monologue of him walking out as a turkey. So I think that season 2, if every episode of his, like, let's say he hosted a few more times and it was all season 2, like, hosting appearances, I would say, okay, yeah, fine. You hosted really before SNL was SNL, but then you sort of got it after that. But I do think that when he does come in and he's a host, he's really sort of just in a couple sketches, doing more musical stuff. Or if he has roles in sketches, Bill, it's really like he's not playing the A role. He's really more the B role of the C role. So I think that is a factor here when talking about Paul Simon. But I'm so curious from you, your overall thoughts on him as a host and what we're saying.
If we were doing a top 50 contributors to SNL, he would be towards the top of that list. Musical guest towards the top of that list. Hosts, no. As you said, like, season 1, it's so important to the beginning of the show that he comes on, he reunites with Art Garfunkel. Like, that brings so many eyeballs to the television screen at that point. But as far as being a host, being in sketches, I mean, you can count on one hand out of these 5 hosting gigs, John. 5. There's 5.
Okay. No, there's not.
Yes, there is. Sorry, if Kristen Wiig hosted an SNL at home by being in one sketch, Paul Simon counts for season 5.
Okay, let's
argue
do this
about this for the end till the end of time. But.
Yeah, but we'll do this because it's fine. It's not like I'm not trying to impose my will on everybody. You can all have your own opinions. All I'm going to say is that when I started the podcast SNL Stats and I was putting together these things, and eventually we began a relationship with NBC, I did ask these questions because personally, even though that Don Pardo announces him as sort of a host in the 100th episode of the show, he doesn't really play the role as host. It's sort of like a 40th anniversary special style show where he sort of just pops up. It's like a special guest almost. So he's there. He's not really playing the role of host. Like if Bill Murray does monologue, right? So it's not the same thing. But then I asked the question, and according to Saturday Night Live's records and NBC Universal, they don't have him as a host of the episode. In fact, I have the document, which is the rundown sheet for the episode. And for every episode, even in the first 5 years, they have the host in the top right corner, except for this one, it says 100th episode special. So he's not a host. I think like you can't, like, Don Pardo has mispronounced names before. We don't just be like, that's their name now. Like, it's not how it works.
Listen, this is all SNL's fault that we have this argument, and it's probably premeditated that they would do this because he's in all the damn 5-timer sketches, first of all. But the fact that, I mean, the history of the show, there's the episodes in the Ebersol era where 5 people are hosting. Why do they get more credit than Paul Simon being credited as a host by Don Pardo in season 5? Sorry. We're never gonna agree on this, John.
Well, I don't think it's like if we as a community defined what makes a host, I think that's fine. But there's also like rules for this, and it applies in sports, right? Like when you're like, okay, what qualifies as like a game played in the majors? Like it's like, okay, you have to, like, even if you went up to bat and the inning ended because somebody got thrown out at the base, like they doesn't count as a real at bat, right? That's like defined by MLB. So like there are specific rules for what counts in sports. And all I'm saying is that like the product that produces the show has rules for how they count hosts, and they don't count him as a 5-time host. Even if Robert Smigel and Conan and Odenkirk put him in the sketch, they don't count it. So I don't think we can.
No, there's some revisionist history if we want to count him as a host. I think I have to agree with John on this one, because if he has the sheets and there's inconsistent naming.
But there's inconsistencies throughout the history of SNL. Like, I don't know.
John, call Lauren and ask him. He'll say he has it though.
I'm going to look for the rundown sheet while Bill tells me his overall thoughts on Paul Simon as a host. So
okay, so let's get into the sketches that do work as far as that goes. I think this is funny that this is the second week in a row we're talking about a season 11 episode, notoriously bad season. It's not a great episode, but I think the prison sketch with John Lovitz is really, really good, and one of those that really highlights Paul Simon's acting ability. And it's kind of, you see the seedlings of what John Lovitz is going to become. And I love the Sweeney sisters in season 13, which he doesn't have a lot to do in either. I mean, it's mostly about Jan and Nora singing Paul Simon songs to Paul Simon. And Castaways, of course, with Victoria. That the season 13 episode, if you're going to point to one hosting gig, that's the one you're going to point to as far as seeing his range as far as a host. But it's not enough to really have him this high on an all-time list.
I agree. I do think, like, saying all of this, our criteria for what makes a great SNL host can be your quality in sketches, but I also think that there's something to do with, moments on the show. And I think like his performances with Art Garfunkel and their tumultuous relationship, like it's very interesting if you are a fan of music to see Paul Simon's relationship with Art and sort of how that progresses through the times that he's on the show. Even to the point of like, there's a sketch that at one point that Paul does where it's like a ticket line and he's like knows every single person in the line, but then Garfunkel comes over and like he doesn't know who he is. He's like, oh yeah, I remember you. You were at my show back in '68 and I remember you were like 10 rows down. But then like Garfunkel comes over, he's like, who are you? And I think like the moments in their relationship is something really interesting to track. George Harrison being in that cold open in season 2, that's also a very big moment given the Beatles' relationship with Saturday Night Live. Like I just think music is a big part of the show's history. So to that extent, I think, Paul's contribution to the history of the show, as Bill said, he's definitely has to be in the top 50 as far as that is concerned. With everything else, his relationship and work with cast members, yeah, there has been some good stuff there. Do I think he has a defining characteristic that he brings to the show? I don't really think he does. He did an interesting sketch with Victoria Jackson in season 13. it's just not enough of a resume for me to be able to look at it and be like comparing to some of these other greats that we look at the show now. Again, if this ended, we're doing this list after season 13, or let's say the first 15 years of the show, I think I can justify why he's a top 50 host based on his 5 times in those 15 years. But overall, for 50 years or almost 50 years, I just think there's just too many great hosts to really just be like, okay, Paul Simon is one of the greats of the greats. Kirsten, back over to you for anything else you want to say about Paul Simon.
Danny DeVito should be ahead of him. It's Paul Simon is only in this position because of his friendship with Lorne. And I think Lorne thinking he's got this, I'll use the term Rolodex because that's what they were using back then, this Rolodex to call George Harrison and to get Paul Simon here and to, to make this show a success, right? Is let me call my buddy and let's show the networks that we can get this star power on here and these ratings. But like, we've not seen Paul Simon do anything else. These were absolutely linked to his friendship with Lorne and the show that he was kind of supporting him with, because he's not an actor and he's not done any other shows. Like musically, yes, bring in your buddy, bring him in. He's famous, he's fantastic, great. Have him reunite with Art and do a couple things. But the fact that we're considering him a host and he's doing full sketches, I think a bunch of his sketches, I would argue, could be played by cast members, except for basketball. I love basketball. And the fun part of that was that it was Paul Simon. That to me is hands down, it had to be Paul Simon. But I can't, like, when I see like a Danny DeVito, John Lithgow, Anne Hathaway, Jack Black, like, what? I don't get it. Yeah,
I definitely agree with you there. Bill, any final thoughts on Paul Simon? And actually, let me ask you, if we were doing and I don't know if we ever will, but if we were going to do a top 50 musical guest in Saturday Night Live history, is he top 10?
Absolutely. Not only for all of his appearance. I mean, he is 10-time musical guest. That again, season 1 is all about him. He does 11 songs. Like, that's insane to think about. Imagine doing a hot take show after that.
It was a variety show of him.
It was. I mean, it really was.
Be like, hey, Bill, so still crazy after all these years. Like, what do you think of that?
How about that? Yeah. All right. Good night, folks. But
I see Andrew Dick being like, I hate
two-part harmonies. Two-part harmonies.
The only other thing I will say, and to me, this is just one of those moments. He has one of the greatest moments in the history of the show, and we've talked about this on a Superfan episode. When he comes out after 9/11 and sings The Boxer to open the show.
Yeah.
Not a hosting gig, but when it opens on that and they cut to the firefighters and the police officers, I mean, it's just one of those moments that will make you tear up 23 years later. So that's important. He is so important to the history of the show. But as a host, again, as we've all said, no, sorry, can't do it.
That's when I want Lorne to call him and to get his black book open, is when that singing The Boxer for 9/11. Like, that's when you're calling your buddy Paul to come in and make this thing really special 100%. And put out this amazing, incredible performance on. That's what I want to see.
So do you guys think we'll see him in 50 at all?
I think we have to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a few years ago he said like he was sort of retired from singing. I don't know like how his voice is now or whatever, but I mean, I think if they were going to do, I think that where we're going to see him is at that Radio City thing on Friday when they talk about like whatever that musical thing that they're going to do, and we'll find out more information as we go. I think he'll be a part of that in some capacity. But I just don't know at his age if he's going to be like singing the way that he did at the 40th. But yeah, look, I'm happy he was on this list because at least we could have the conversation about him. And just for fun, I'll bring up on screen. So you guys know what a rundown sheet is. So Saturday Night Live has like a list of they use different sheets every single week. They do like a pink sheet, which is dress, and a green sheet, which is air. Usually it shows like the order, and it's for people at the show to be able to walk around and know what's coming up next. And you could see it in shots between commercials. It's hung up everywhere. So basically, I'm going to show you what it looks like here in the first 5 years, which here's one. This is from the Rodney Dangerfield episode of Saturday Night Live. This is from season 5. So yeah, typewriter. So you see in the top right corner, host Rodney Dangerfield from show 178, March 8th, 1980. Okay, so Here we go. You see the list of sketches, everything. We see the host in the top right corner. Every episode has the host in the top right corner. Okay.
I love that John brought receipts.
Okay. Then if you go to episode 100, what is that? No host in the top right corner? 100th show anniversary is there instead. It must be that there was no host for that episode, right, Bill?
That can't be a typo, right? I mean, and you said that the writers, just because the writers put him into a 5-time, that had to go through Lorne. Robert Smigel was sitting in Lorne's office, promoting this 5-timer sketch in 1990 with Tom Hanks, and wants Paul Simon in it. Lorne very easily could have said, technically he's only a 4-time host.
No, because I think he felt. No, but I think because he was 5, but for host and musical guest, I think he was like, let's count it, right? Like anybody who's over 5 anything.
But no, they've never done that any other time in the history of the show.
Okay, I don't know. Well, it's wrong. So yeah. Okay. Well,
John,
anyways,
we're going to have a spin-off of this podcast, and it's going to be a point counterpoint of just an hour and a half of us arguing about this. And tune in next week for that.
I love that you shared this, by the way. These are run sheets that I use for the productions that I do in my day job. And so to see them done in this way is pretty incredible. Thanks for sharing these.
Yeah, I love
it. Of course, it's my pleasure. All right, well, we're just having some fun here, but there you go. Paul Simon at 45. We got 2 more to reveal tonight. This one will be interesting to talk about. I'll just throw it out there. Number 44, I think, is a really fascinating host in Saturday Night Live history that nobody really wants to talk about anymore, but we're going to do it here because he was voted into the top 50. So at number 44, 4-time host, Louis C.K. here at number 44, hosted 4 times in a very small period of time. Truly, we mentioned the Dana Carvey show before, was a writer on the Dana Carvey show, helped contribute to some TV fun houses, was built into the fabric of the show at a certain point. And then once he became a huge star, he was brought in season 38, 39, 40 and 42. So over like a 5-year span, hosted 4 times in 5 years. To me, on the trajectory of being a potential top 10, top 20 host in SNL history, could have hosted 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. I mean, he's really somebody who is getting up there and was so well used in the show throughout that time, had some big moments, and it was truly like a great host of the show. And then off of the show, a lot of stuff has come out about Louis C.K. Naturally, the show will not ever book him again, but there's a lot of big what if questions just from a Saturday Night Live perspective, where we're looking at here the resume of somebody who was on the trajectory of being an all-time great host. So, Bill, your thoughts on the voters putting Louis C.K. here in at number 44?
I'll make a sports analogy for you. A couple weeks ago, a no-name player from the Padres got suspended for life for betting. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody cares. But when Pete Rose got suspended, it's a harder thing to do because you're talking about one of the all-time greats. I think, obviously, this is a much more serious thing that he's been accused of. And but he is not a Robert Blake or an O.J. Simpson where it's like, well, they hosted once. The episode was terrible. We never have to talk about them again. You have to talk about. I
thought you were going to say he didn't kill somebody, but yeah.
Well, there is that too, correct. But
casual murder. Yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah. But to me, as a personal thing, I think you can separate the art from the artist. You never have to book him again. You never will book him again, and that's fine. But you can look at what he did on the show and appreciate for what it was. Now, that being said, there are some problematic sketches that, in hindsight, you go, oh boy. And I'm looking at Soda Fountain from season 42, where he's hitting on a supposedly teenage Cecily Strong. So there's seeds there where it is very cringe, very hard to watch, knowing what he's been accused of. But most of his episodes are so solid, especially, again, the first 2. They're just classic episodes, especially in the era of the 2010s. I don't know who else you would point to at that point that was doing so much good work on the show as a host.
Yeah, it's funny because I sort of feel like, every show, and we're going to get to this as we continue to go through the list, like every era of the show has the hosts that are defined as like the hosts of that era. I think I heard Seth Meyers recently call them like the second cast that they're building. And he said that like as he talked about when Natalie Portman came in after, during a season 31. And he was like, I felt like that was the first host that started to really click with this new cast of people and was like, we're starting to build the second cast, but they're hosts. And I feel like for, the Cecily 80K era, Louis C.K. was really starting to be like their host in a way. And he, this is, after Timberlake, before Mulaney was really defined as being part of these two things, there comes Louis C.K. So to me, I think it's really interesting here because, again, Kirsten, so many what if questions with Louis. So how are you feeling about him ending up here on 44 on the list?
Well, I think, Bill, you captured really well what we're facing here. It's very complicated. But I revisited a lot of the sketches and I was laughing my ass off. So I absolutely think it's a real shame that he did the things he did. And that's what it sucks because we were losing the comedy part of things and what he was able to bring to the show. So it kind of makes me mad that, he was doing such stupid shit. I mean, he's paying the price now, right? He's been ostracized. And you're right. What if he could be in the Five Timers Club, just yucking it up in his jacket. And we were all celebrating him. But let me talk about the things that I did really enjoy. And that's, him being a stand-up, but also he had some acting chops. Like he fit in. He was reading the cards a bunch, but there were a lot of great sketches. I think that 2014 and 2015, those are the ones that I was really cracking up at. He was also surrounded by a really energetic cast of like Kyle, Beck, and Taryn, like all people who were having a lot of fun. I think of things like Police Lineup when they were actors. Cabana was cute. Dyke and Fats. I mean, he just had a small role in that, but he was a part of some really memorable sketches. And then 2014, things like Space Encounter with the shirtless posters, like just playing it straight. And I think he did that so well. He was always willing to get into really crazy costumes and make fun of himself. And I can't recall him breaking ever, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if he really broke. And so you've got to admire that because that is very hard to do. As we know, Heidi, memorably broke after 7 years or something. And it was in the news. So like, it's pretty awesome to do. And you're surrounded by the Cecilys of the world who are so funny and so amazing. I have a few other sketches, but John, you look like.
Well, I was going to say he's really good at keeping it together. And
yes.
The reason that I know that is because I attended an episode that he hosted. So, Kirsten, I'll come back to you for a couple other moments, but I do want to tell this story to the listeners because I don't know if I've really gotten into it too much on the podcast here, but I was there for the season 42, episode 17 with the Chainsmokers that he hosted his last time hosting. I was on the floor for that episode. So if you go back and you watch it, you can see me in the commercial breaks, where they pan to the audience. So you get to see me there. I was on the floor. It was really exciting. I was invited to the show at the time because they were doing something back then where I think it was like they put on social media that they wanted to bring like some of the biggest fans of the show to the show. And I had this Twitter account at the time called SNL Stats. It wasn't a podcast then, but I was posting statistics about the show. And they reached out and they were like, hey, if you want to come to the show, you should come. And I was like, this is the craziest thing that's ever happened to me. I got my tickets the Friday night of the Saturday night show. So like it was April 7th and the show was on April 8th. I was in Toronto, which is 6 hours away from where I live. Had to take a train back. I mean, I'm obviously going to the show. It's my first time at SNL. I took a train back in the morning, got back, like left 6 a.m., like got back at 12, got in the car, then drove another 6.5 hours to get to New York to get there for the show. Such a cool experience being there on the floor, getting to see everybody. Like it was my first time ever in the building. It was just absolutely crazy. But some of the coolest things that I got to experience at that time, just by being on the floor was simply that, like, just to see Louis C.K. up close and how energetic and powerful he was as a host really was like surprising to me. Like, I knew he was good. I knew he was a great stand-up, but to see his, reactions with the audience, before he introduces the musical guest, before he's like, ladies and gentlemen, the Chainsmokers, he's cracking jokes with the audience. Like, you could see as it comes back on commercial, he's laughing, but that's because he's just like ignited the room in a way that only a great stand-up can. And I walked away from that night being like, oh, wow, this is one of the greatest hosts ever, just because of his charisma was just off the charts. So for me, like, just being able to see it in person, it was like, Bill, it was like going to watch like a basketball game and seeing some guy do like a crazy dunk, and you're like, oh my God, like, I can't believe I was there when that guy got posterized.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I told you last week off air, like, Louis was probably the best. I've seen a lot of stand-up. I've been to a lot of big shows, seen all the big names. I think he's the best stand-up I've ever seen. I saw him in 2016, I believe. And yeah, his energy, his charisma was off the charts, even for a show like that. So yeah, it is so disappointing. And if anybody wants to see the picture of John on the stage, I have that picture. So
I want to see it. Yeah,
I have it framed on my wall. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Such great points made by both of you. I think he would be a top 10 all-time host if we didn't have these last 7 years of everything that happened. If he had come back another 3 or 4 times in the last 7 years, he would definitely be in. Now, the season 42 episode is a little bit lesser than the other 3, in my opinion, even though it has my favorite moment by him, the birthday clown with Bobby.
So good.
So good. That pre-tape. If you haven't seen that in a while, please go back and watch that. He's a 53-year-old man that hires a birthday clown. Doesn't tell Bobby that he's the only one that's going to be there, and it just descends into madness from there. But yeah, I think his first 3 for sure are just complete classics, and it's a damn shame.
For me, there's 2 that really stand out as like moments that I will always remember from Louis C.K. on SNL. One is the last call sketch with Sheila Sauvage, where I really feel like like Louis C.K. with Kate McKinnon just paired together is just an incredible pairing. Like, it was a match made in heaven for a comedy perspective, just to see the 2 of them going at it in the last sketch of the night. So I think that, moment at the end of the night of his first hosting appearance really cemented him as being like, okay, we have to have this guy back as soon as possible. So they bring him back, just a year and a half later. And then for me, the sectionals sketch from season 42, I know you said it's not a classic, but to me, that one in the building crushed, because I've used the term the nexus of the couch every day since I've been to that episode, where just to see the prop department and everything and him doing that, like, it broke the building. And I think that was so funny. So I actually, maybe, and I guess I have like rose colored glasses because I was there, but I do think the 42 episode is a good episode of the show. Like, it is a better episode than a lot of people like who we have on this list, some of their worst hosting episodes. So I think his average is just super high. Kirsten, what about you? You said you had a couple other moments on your list.
Last Call was one of them, because that also was a masterclass in seeing that type of character work happen. But it really crackled with live energy, that one, and you saw it build based on the chemistry of both of them embodying those characters. That was so fun to watch. There's another just kind of random one that I don't see on your list, but it's Private Eyes with Vanessa, and it's a wacky one, but it's so lovable. I mean, she's incredible. But again, he's going toe to toe with all of these cast members in a very memorable way, and kind of folding right into the vibe of the sketch. With, Last Call, he's right in there and he's slurring and it's hilarious. And then Private Eyes, he kind of adopts this like really odd vernacular way of speaking that him and Vanessa have, and about the pajamas and cutting holes in the pajamas. Like, it's just so weird and funny. But again, that stuff would crack me up, and a lot of people would have a little smirk on their face, and he just goes for it. And I don't know, I mean, someone like Vanessa in those different characters that she had, and Kate, like, hats off to you for, yeah, I know someone said it's, not breaking is a bare minimum. But listen, we're with the greatest kind of comedy legends around who are doing the funniest stuff on live television. And I think it is commendable not to break and not to laugh and not to try not to enjoy that and really, be in it. And sidebar, Demi, these are from Bailey Nelson. My glasses, you asked. They're Bailey Nelson. They're actually sunglasses, and I turned them into glasses because I wanted oversized. So there you go.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, look, I think there's a lot of obviously really great moments from Louis C.K. I think this conversation would have been much different about him before all that stuff came out. And we would have been like, wow. Now it's a little bit harder to have this conversation, but truly, one of the great hosts that is marred by things that happened off of the show. And, I'll say just from looking again at the criteria I use, could he have been a cast member? I think absolutely he could have been a cast member, definitely fit in. I mean, if, his connection to the Dana Carvey show and sketch comedy in general clearly was built for Saturday Night Live. If he could have have that life, I think he would have been great as a cast member. Defining characteristic he brings to the show, I think his sense of humor, his brand, his wit, I think is definitely defining for me. So I think it's really strong. Multiple casts, I think, loses a little bit there on points because we do get to see him in such a short period of time. Of course, had things not happened the way that they did, perhaps we do see him more often now, and we get to answer that question from an analytics perspective. 7.5 segments per episode, so that's pretty good for like a little bit above average for a host nowadays. So he truly when he does host, he's a good amount all over the show. And from a legacy perspective, I think we have to say not applicable here because the legacy has just changed so much in terms of being able to define him. So it is a little bit hard for me, Bill, to know where to place him on my list. We'll get to that in a moment, but I'd like to get your final thoughts on Louis C.K. as a host coming in here at number 44.
It is. It's very difficult. This may be the most difficult. We could joke about Paul Simons and things like that, but this is a really difficult one to place because you do want to be respectful of people who never want to see a second of his episodes again. And I completely understand that. But you do have to look at the work he was able to do in the short amount of time that he was on. And so many great moments in a time that was, at the beginning when he was coming on, the show was still very strong. I think by season 42, it had started to lose some of its luster because of all the Trump stuff. The episode, I think that's where 42 loses me a little bit because you do get the Baldwin cameo. You get Baldwin versus Baldwin in a sketch that Louis not even in.
With Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah. So I think it would be interesting to see as the show has made a resurgence how he would have done, but it's damn hard, and I don't know where he's going to end up on my final list because it's a struggle, even if you do separate the art from the artist.
Yeah, Kirsten, for you, final thoughts on Louis C.K.?
Yeah, Bill, that last sentence, in separating the art from the artist, Michael Jackson and like all these, he's not alone, which is really sad. And kind of putting us in this position where we want to love his work, but we can't abide by the way he behaved. Like it's complicated, but he's a part of the show. And I think talking about that, while still respecting that, other people don't want to talk about it is the best that we can do. I mean, the show overall will have moments where, because of whether it was the era, we don't want to talk about things. I'm looking like Jay Marr and Brownface. Like there are other moments that I think are far more cringy. This is really unfortunate that, we don't get to have him back because I do think it would have been pretty amazing. And he would have been higher up on this list had he not made some really fucking dumb decisions in his life.
Yeah. All right, well, let's close the book there on Louis C.K. here at number 44, and let's talk about the final host we're going to talk about tonight, the only one who isn't a four-timer. So here we go. At number 43, this is going to be fun and light conversation about somebody who I think is truly a brilliant performer and one that I'm happy has hosted the show a few times, and that is at number 43, the amazing Lily Tomlin here at number 43, another host from season 1 who comes in as host of the show 3 times. First time was episode 6. So I would say just when SNL was starting to, figure it out. we had, George Carlin, we had Paul Simon, Rob Reiner, Candice Bergen, and then Robert Klein. And, Robert Klein's episode is the one that people often say that Lauren described as the first time SNL felt like SNL. And in comes Lily Tomlin, who had a great performance background and injected some of her flavor into the show, which I think was really fun. Season 2, episode 1, she hosts the premiere of the second season ever with musical guest James Taylor, and is all over that show as well. And then we don't get to see her again until the Ebersol era, where she's brought in January of '83, season 8, episode 10, in this period where Ebersol is really bringing in hosts that sort of define the characteristic of the episode, that sort of take over what the episode looks like. And we get to see a lot of Lily Tomlin characters from when she was doing them before Saturday Night Live, but brings them back. So the Judith Beasleys and Ernestines and all of that. But yeah, here we go. Lily Tomlin, a 3-time host. Let's talk about her, somebody who hasn't hosted the show since 1983, even though we did see her a few years ago in a cameo. So Kirsten, let me start with you on this one. Your thoughts, Lily Tomlin at 43.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to see that we're recognizing a female and an older female. So yay. The first seasons of the show were just so different that it's hard to think of them as and compare them at all with what I know now and what I personally prefer, how the show is structured and what the format is. It was awesome to see her and her energy. But there's some weird moments. Like there was like the whole 50s monologue that she did that went on a little long. But again, this whole variety format where she sang, she danced, she did monologues. I started to get more into it in season 8 when there was more what we know of as like kind of sketches, like proper sketches with ensembles, and it felt a little more organized that way. But she's a legend in the business, and I'm glad that she's on this list so that we're recognizing her and for the time that she spent in season 1 and season 2. I don't know that she's someone that would come back for season 50, if nothing else, maybe just to introduce someone or something, kind of the way they do at award shows. But she's fun. She's popular again now, so there might be some more recency bias there and why she was involved, because I think a lot of people may have forgotten that she was there at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about her and Lauren's relationship, how that is, but given how many times we've seen Candice Bergen back, I would think that, they would put out a hand to Lily to come in for something in season 50, even if it's just to introduce somebody as a part of the 50th special. Yeah, she is just so important to the early days of SNL, being one of the first women to host the show. And like I said, just truly bringing in a level of experience to the show that I think that, when I think about the old days of Saturday Night Live, Bill, I always think about how, we called them the not ready for primetime players because the primetime players were coming in to teach them the way it goes. And I think Lily is a great defining host of that type of that type of thing where, everybody probably looked at Lily Tomlin coming in episode 6 and were just amazed with what she could do as a sketch performer. So your thoughts on Lily and her being here at 43?
Yeah, John, you and I had a great conversation on a Hall of Fame roundtable a couple seasons ago about does she fit the Hall of Fame mode, or is she more? And I think we came down on she's a major contributor again to the history of the show. She got Lauren his start basically. She was already well established in the comedy world because of Laugh-In, because of her specials that were on TV that were getting tens of millions of views on network television. So for her to come in, as you said, as a comic legend already in 1975 was a big deal. To have a female voice on the show, it's famous that Rosie Schuster and Ann Beats wrote Hard Hat sketch. It was really the first sketch that they had gotten on the air, and Belushi wouldn't do it. They talked Aykroyd into it, and it's just all these female construction workers harassing this man in short shorts. And it's just something at that time was probably very controversial, to flip the tables on the male dominance of everything, including in comedy. And to have Lily there for something like that, and to have Ann and Rosie get their first kind of foot in the door is a very important part of the show as well. And the season 2 episode is fantastic. She hosts the premiere, and that whole meta opening where she's coming through 30 Rock, which looks exactly the same, other than a couple of signs. And to have her go up and do the whole thing where she's a bigger star than the show is, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is true. It is a wonderful moment, and we just released Everything You Need to Know About Saturday Night Live Season 2 last week on Thursday, and we showed that shot of her coming into the building, the crowd outside. It's like, oh, wow, this is SNL isn't just like people putting this together in their backyard anymore. Now it's like, it's a thing, it's an institution, and people are starting to come in, and it's counterculture, and people are excited about it. And I just think Lily is so great, starting off that season. We talk about, sometimes people get to talk about the antler dance, and like what a fun moment that was at the end of episode 2, that people would do the antler dance and stuff like that. I just think she brings a little bit of a light and an energy to the show that is really, really unique. It's something that I don't see with a lot of other hosts. And for me, I agree with you. One of the best contributors to the history of the show. And I definitely think a Hall of Fame host of, the original era, Hall of Fame host of the first 10 years. The fact that she hasn't hosted since 1983, I don't know if that would necessarily qualify her for the Hall of Fame, but I can justify 43 on the list here. I think there's a lot of reasons why. Number one is that I think she absolutely brings a defining characteristic. I think you know what you're going to get when Lily Tomlin hosts the show. She could have been a cast member for sure. I mean, she was too established by that point to be a cast member, but at a certain point in her career, I mean, she fits definitely into the fabric of the show. Can she work with multiple cast members? Well, fortunately for us, we do have a little bit of a resume of her working with some Ebersol era cast members. So for that, I can justify that Lily Tomlin, even though she didn't host in modern times, could have done that. So for me, one of the better cast members, analytics wise, 9.67 segments per episode. There was definitely more segments per episode earlier on, so it's a little bit amplified, that number, but still like very much all over the show when she hosts the show, does impressions, does her characters, brought them back in season 8. So to me, from an analytics perspective, all over the show. And I do think from a legacy perspective, because of her, experience on Laugh-In, her relationship to the early days of the show, I think she has a very strong legacy. So she checks a lot of boxes for me about what makes a great Saturday Night Live host. For you, Kirsten, any other moments or thoughts on Lily Tomlin that you want to talk about?
Yeah, she almost looks like Kristen Wiig could be her daughter, the way that they perform and the way that they kind of just really there's a lot of freedom for them on that stage, right? Where they're just all like dances and gangly limbs and laughs and energy. Like I could see them being related in that they're kind of from the same factory, maybe. I loved Hard Hats also, and I think Lily ran away with that. If you rewatch it, she's really the one in charge of the kind of vibe there, and everyone else is getting there, but she is leaning right in, and she makes that sketch. Obviously, Ernestine is amazing. But I'd say my favorite is Judith Beasley in the grocery store eating the free food. Grabbing the chicken wing and turning her back at the perfect moment. That could play now and I would love it just as much. It's so silly and funny, and I just wanted more of that. That to me is my prime kind of SNL moment. And I think now, having seen that, imagine Judith Beasley coming back now. She actually now is the age she was probably trying to be. So I would love, let's put this out into the world, that Judith Beasley should come back and we should see a little mini sketch of her in 50.
Yeah, I could definitely see her somewhere in the 50th special. Like maybe if she's not introducing, maybe it's sort of like a Lorraine Newman in the Californians, style cameo where we can get her playing some type of role in
maybe
a larger.
She's a Target with the Target lady.
It could be, that would be great. So it could be anything like that. Some other moments I have down, for me, her relationship to the Muppets, which, are sort of these like pseudo cast members in season 1. I always said that the only ones that are really watchable from the Land of Gorch are the ones with Lily Tomlin, where she seems to have a relationship with them. And in season 2, episode 1 sort of puts them to sleep. And I just think, that carryover from the storyline of those 2 episodes of her, the Muppets really loving Lily and her sort of, taking them off of Saturday Night Live is something that's like really special and heartwarming about those early days at the show. And then, her being a part of Debate 76, I think that is such a cute huge moment to me as well, that she is there for the first presidential debate sketch. Like if you go through, Bill, all of those, the best political moments in the history of the show, any highlight package to do with politics on Saturday Night Live, you'll see Lily Tomlin because she was there for the beginning of it.
Yeah, that's the very first debate. It's one of the better ones. Obviously, that's where we get the. I was told there would be no math. Chevy's famous injury that led for him not to be on the show. So that's the seedlings of it. It's funny that that's the beginning of that and the end of the Muppets in the same episode, which really puts SNL in a better place.
Yeah, definitely. I also put down Pudge and Solomon, which was really cool to see, Eddie Murphy, Joe Piscopo, and Lily Tomlin together in a sketch. I think that's also a really fun moment.
Yeah, and the other thing from that episode, I love the cold open where she's trying to talk Eddie down from his superstardom. He had just hosted the show as a cast member, and everybody's coming in dressed as different Eddie Murphy characters. And she ends it with one of the few times where it's not live from New York. It's Saturday night. It's the Lily Tomlin show. So there's a lot of fun there. Next time we get to talk to our friend Gary, love to get his thoughts on Lily being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill, any other final thoughts on Lily?
No, I think we've covered most of it. I love Ernestine. I think they're dated because I don't know that people would even know what a phone operator is today. But like even the season 8 episode where she goes into the house, this is the beginning of Ma Bell being broken up. So the fact that she's going into the house and tearing up the telephone off the wall, like explaining to somebody who's under 40 that you had to rent your telephone from the phone company is just such a wacky thing. But that's one of my favorite characters, and I think outside of Chappelle, it's hard to really point to somebody who's brought so many characters from outside SNL into the show, and I think that just kind of shows the respect that she got.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that is Lily Tomlin here at number 43. So 4 very fascinating hosts that we talked about tonight in Dana Carvey, Paul Simon, Louis C.K., and Lily Tomlin. And now here comes the difficult part of the show where Bill and I have to place these people on our list as we go. We'll do a running rankings list, and you'll see them every single week as we add in new hosts. So Kirsten, as our guest, you're going to have to tell us whose list is better. I guess that's the way that we'll do this as we go.
Okay.
So a couple things here. So first, we'll do our predictions segment, which I asked Bill last time for 3 predictions. So how many 5-timers are going to be in this list? How many 1-timers? And how many former cast members? So Bill said that there are going to be 18 5-timers. So we still only have 1 on this list so far, according to my ranking, my records. So only 1 5-timer right now. Bill, you weren't counting Paul Simon when you said 18, were you?
Yes, sir.
He probably
okay.
was.
I'll give you 1. You have 1.5. Cast members, you said 16, so you do have Dana Carvey added to that, and then 1-timers, you said there are gonna be 5 1-timers on the list, so 0 so far that we've seen come up out of the first 8. But here we go. I'm gonna put up on screen my list and Bill's list, and I'll go through them, and Bill, I'll let you justify where you place these people. So on the left side here, we have our host rankings. Mine are in the middle. So I put Dana Carvey in my 1 slot. I do think he's the best host we've seen so far. I have to put him at the top. He's right ahead of Danny DeVito. Louis C.K., I am sort of separating art from artist here, where I am just, looking at his contributions to the show as a host. I have him at 3 right now. I'm willing to knock him down a little bit, but I just think, that 4 times there, I sort of have to put him above some of these others, but I'm willing to be negotiated. Lily Tomlin is right there at number 4. I could see maybe reversing those. Jack Black at 5, Anne Hathaway 6, John Lithgow 7 as last week. And I do have Paul Simon at number 8 on my list. He wouldn't be in my top 50. Great contributor to the show. It doesn't do it for me. So, there's a chance that Paul Simon is this version's Marty Short, of the cast list. So, Bill, your thoughts on where you placed your people?
I don't think I'd fight for Paul Simon quite as much as I did for Marty. I can see Paul being at the bottom of this list. And this is fluid, right? I mean, we can switch.
It's fluid. Yeah, we only will lock these in as final once we reveal the whole list.
Yeah, I mean, Danny and Dana, you can really make the case for. I mean, what it's going to come down to with a lot of these folks is, I said this a little bit last week, how many of their episodes are great. because that's what's really going to I mean, you have so many people are going to be 3-time, 4-time hosts. That's not going to be like every 4-time host is not greater than every 3-time host. So it's going to be really interesting. I could flip Lily and Louis. I could see where that would be flipped as well. But I think we're pretty close other than the Paul Simon thing right now, John.
So why do you have Paul Simon 6? What's the reason for that?
I think I gave him a few extra legacy points as far as just overall legacy points, not host legacy points. So I think that's kind of where I went with that. But yeah, I do love the Lithgow episodes. So it's really, really difficult.
Okay, Kirsten, whose list do you like more right now?
They are very similar. For the pure reason of Paul Simon placement, I have to go with John's.
All right, 1-0, John. We'll count this as we go. But
they're so similar, right? Like it's so similar. So there you go, Paul Simon.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, we'll adjust this as we go. Next week we are gonna thank you, Debbie. I don't hate Paul Simon. I just think he's the lowest on the list right now. And maybe that somebody else will come up and I'll be like, how did this person make the top 50? And they'll go below Paul Simon. But we'll see as we reveal 4 more hosts next week, as we're going to do 42, 41, 40, and 39. So you have to join us next Monday night for that as we continue this countdown each and every Monday. This was so much fun to do. I hope you all enjoy this. It's been great chatting with everybody on Monday. Like I said, such a lively chat for a summer episode talking about Saturday Night Live. So keep joining us every single week for our reveals. If you are enjoying this content and you're enjoying hearing about old SNL, I'm sure you'll enjoy our Everything You Need to Know About Saturday Night Live series that we have going on each and every Thursday night here throughout the summer. So we just released episode 2 last week, season 3, all about season 3 coming up on Thursday on the YouTube channel. So check it out. Give us a comment. Let us know what you think about that season and how we did talking about it. So that is what's going on over here at the SNN. Bill Kenny, thank you for joining us tonight. Anything that you would like to say to the listeners?
Thanks for having me as always, John. This is so much fun. You've flipped my SNL watching for the summer. I typically binge a season. I'm binging hosts now, and it's been so much fun to go back as you give me the 4 people, and I'm watching their episodes, and they're from so many different eras, and kind of getting a feel and remembering why we love the show so much. So can't wait to do it all again next week.
Absolutely. We will see you next week. Bill and Kirsten, thank you for joining us. Anything you would like to plug to our listeners?
Oh, no, I just want to say thanks. This is always so fun. And I love having the opportunity to chat with you both and to just dust off some episodes that I haven't seen in a while. It's a nice way to force me to reconnect with those. And I love it. So thank you both.
Absolutely. I want to thank our presenting partner for the show tonight, and that would be latenighter.com. They have so many great things happening on their website right now, all about late night television. So go check that out. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X at the SNL Network. We got some really fun things posting there, including these graphics. So if you're listening on audio and you want to see visually the graphics that we put on YouTube, we're also going to put them on social media. We'll do that the following Monday after each episode so that you have all week to listen to. If you're maybe late to an episode and you don't want to get spoiled, we're going to put the silhouettes up on YouTube on the thumbnails. We're not going to post everything until the following week, so you have an entire week to listen to this without getting spoiled on anything, hopefully. So they are available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and any other podcast platform you enjoy listening to. Just subscribe to the podcast, search the Saturday Night Network. All right, everybody. On behalf of Bill Kenny and Kirsten Rayala, my name is John Schneider from the Saturday Night Network, and we will see you next time. Have a good one.